Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the LiftAffect podcast. I am your host, Matt McNeil, founder, clinical director, and director of human performance at LiftAffect, where we assist professional pilots with maintaining better mental health and optimizing their mental skills. The goal of this podcast is simple: to help pilots and other high liability professionals and disciplines come out of the shadows to discover how we can live better lives personally and professionally. Join us each episode as we discuss various topics ranging from mental health, mental skills and performance, to business, entrepreneurship, and a few other surprises along the way. Hello, ladies and gents. Welcome to another episode of LiftAffect Podcast. Matt here, flying solo today, single pilot, single seat. Carl is out for, he's got some stuff that he's doing, so I thought I would just run one of these on my own. So what should we talk about? What do you guys think? What would be good? What haven't we covered? So when I was thinking about today, since I'm on my own, I don't have Carl to ask questions. He usually looks at all the questions and he just lobs them over. I kind of like to not know what the questions are. I appreciate the spontaneity. I think it keeps things a little more fun. I'm not a whole lot into structure. And I could certainly look into the questions. I've got a list of. It's funny when the questions come in, they get put into buckets. You know, here's a question on performance. Here's a question on mental health. Here's a question on, there's been a bunch of questions that have come up that are questions about Matt, background wise, or, things that maybe I have mentioned that I never really got into. I have purposely kind of avoided those, just not because I'm trying to hide. Well, maybe a little bit, but not really. But because I, just didn't feel like those were all that important. But I could maybe field through a couple of these, since, it's just me here today. And I don't mind sharing a little bit about my own experience. And another thing I wanted to talk about, which has been getting a lot of consistent questions on breathing. Some of these questions are, why do you keep talking about breathing so much? Why is breathing so important? Aren't you maybe placing a little too much emphasis on breathing? So on and so forth. So maybe we could delve into that for a little bit today. I'll try to keep this episode pretty succinct and short, just so you can go on with the rest of your day. But why don't we do that? So, okay, here's what I'll do. I'm going to pull up a few questions. I'm just going to open this up and get into the folder, and I will attempt to answer just a couple questions. Maybe you'll find them interesting, maybe not, but what the hell. Okay, so let me just go through some of these. So, why do you not mention the carrier that you used to fly for? I think people know the carrier I flew for. You can find that out. But simply because I don't represent that carrier, my opinions are not representative of my former employer. And I just think it just kind of keeps it separate. One of the things that I've been acutely aware of is the difference between employers, the difference between carriers. Sometimes it can get contentious. And which is weird. That was always weird to me in the community. The pilot community is one carrier better than the other? Who gets paid more? Who doesn't get paid more? Who's got a better contract? Who doesn't have a better contract? Hires more military pilots? Who hires more civilian pilots? Who hires more people of color? Who hires more women? Who hires more people that have, their sexual orientation is different? There's all this, chatter around that. And I think that the experience of just our profession is universal. And I try to focus on the universal experiences of our profession and the universal experiences of just being a human being, just being a person, a professional. One of the things, if you were to fill one of my clients always talks about this, and he's right. If you were to fill a stadium with all commercial 121 pilots in the United States, the stadium would still be half empty. I mean, that's how few of us there are. It's a very tiny group, and I think our there's some very universal common experiences that we all have. So I've always tried to not really like try to differentiate the difference. Now I know that there's differences. It's not to say that there aren't differences out there between your employer, and not all employers are equal, and some pilots are more abused by their employers than others. But I've purposely stayed away from that. One question I've got is there a difference between regional pilots and um, mainline or national carrier pilots? I think in the past, the experience level was different. The regionals were where less experienced pilots were. And you get more experience and then you move on to the mainline carriers. That has changed. I think the playing field has become a lot more level because of this, the pent up need for pilots. But is the flying different? Yeah, the flying is different. Now some of you guys are gonna argue. Guys and gals are gonna say, Matt, you're wrong. But we do a lot more legs. The smaller the carrier you're at. Regional pilots are used to flying, 5, sometimes 7 legs in a day, whereas just because they're not doing hub to hub, but they're doing hub to small little community where you can get a smaller airplane in than a mainline carrier. So the distances between legs are less, and I think that there's challenges with doing a lot more legs. There's mainline carrier has a lot longer flights, which has its own unique set of challenges. They're crossing a lot more time zones, so there's circadian disruption challenges that maybe the smaller carrier, the regional pilots don't have they still have circadian disruption for sure. They still can do 3 or 4 time zones, but they're not, crossing the pond where they're 12, 15 hours ahead. The duration is less, but the amounts of ups and downs, going up and down multiple times a day, has its own unique set of challenges. So there's a difference there. Another question. Somebody asked a question which I thought this was interesting. What kind of car do I drive? I'm not sure why that's relevant. Okay, I've have a Nissan Pathfinder. I've had a Nissan Pathfinder since 1990. When did I get my first Pathfinder? 97. And I've had 4 of them. I love Nissan Pathfinders. I always have a Pathfinder. I think it's a great car. I think Nissans are totally underrated car. And the other car I have, I've got a couple other cars. One of them is an electric car. This is my first electric car that I ever bought, and it's not a Tesla. Okay, so that's that. Why? It's an interesting question. Carl, some of these questions I get, I'm always like, why do people want to know? And Carl's like, I think people just want to know more about who is this guy, right? Which I can appreciate that. Another question is, Matt, you've mentioned music a lot. Matt, you've mentioned music a lot. It seems like you have played a lot of music, and do you continue to play? Have you played in any bands, so on and so forth? Yes. Music has been a huge part of my life. It started when I was 11 or 12, when I got my first guitar, and it just was like, it opened up this whole world to me. So I, played in bands when I was in high school and all throughout college and even after. Some of these are just little unknown bands. I've been in a band that has been signed. We did tour. Was a great experience. Dealing with a record label was the worst experience in the world. Do I continue to play? I do. I play music all the time. It's a huge part of my life. I have one primary writing partner that I've worked with for over 20 years. He's a Brit, but he actually lives in New York City, and we have collaborated. I'm not going to mention his name, but he's a accomplished, well-known producer, and we have worked together every week for the last 20 years. We've some of our stuff got tied up with label related things, and that is all now resolved. So I want to start putting more music out just for fun, right? So yeah, big part of my life. I play guitar, I play bass and keyboards and a little bit of drums or just whatever, just make noise. So yeah, big part of my existence. I think once some of this stuff gets put up on Spotify, I can tell you where you can find it if you want to listen to some music that I've created. So that's that. Creativity, huge part of my life. When I'm not being creative, I tend to get really depressed, right? Creativity, I think the greatest definition of depression is a complete lack of creativity. I think that's very true. So I have really worked to make creativity a part of my life. There's been times where I have not been very creative. I think even times where I was totally burned out and just didn't want to have anything to do with it. And taking breaks is important, but I think as I even get older, to be able to continue with creativity, creative work is a huge factor in just my overall well-being, overall mental health. All right, here's another one. How long have you been married? You talk about relationships, wondering what your own relationships are like, if you're comfortable sharing. Yeah, I've been married it's going to be 20 years come this December. I met my wife when I was in college. She had graduated. I took the longer route for college. But we met in there was a bar restaurant that we both worked at. And I guess was she my boss? Don't tell her that. I think she was my boss. But I originally got hired to kind of just, do some work behind the counter, some cooking. It was sort of like a coffee shop that had a restaurant and had a bar and it was a cool place to hang out. I used to just hang out there all the time between classes or whatever. And finally they're like, dude, do you want to just work here? Because you're here all the time. You might as well get paid. So I was like, yeah, it sounds great. I'll hang out and drink coffee and get paid. And so we met that way. We didn't date. We were pretty good friends. I was in a different relationship with somebody else. She was with somebody else. And we just were really, really good friends. We had a lot of commonalities in music, and she's got a very dark sense of humor. So do I. Kind of the graveyard humor. We really bonded over that, and we were good friends. And interestingly enough, this place, they moved me from being a cook behind the counter and then working the counter. They said, we need a bouncer. Which, if anybody knows, I'm not like a huge guy, right? I'm like 5'10", 165 pounds, right? I'm not a big guy, but they had me. I wasn't afraid to tussle, right? A little bit, but more importantly, I wasn't afraid to de-escalate a situation. I could sort of talk the most violent drunk from, being totally angry off the wall into, it just became a pussycat, right? And so I had this ability to de-escalate situations. I just thought I liked it. It was fun. I understand the guy that's mad and drunk and is upset and wants to beat the shit out of everybody. I get it. It's cool. I kind of grew up with those guys. And so they quickly moved me out to the door. And honestly, it was very easy to tussle with drunk guys because they're drunk and I was not. And so it's like, it's kind of not really a fair challenge, but I would just de-escalate the situations. And so I loved working the door. It was super fun. I would mingle with people and got to know people, and I'd be hanging out. And so that was my experience. That's how I met my wife. And she ended up moving to New York. I was still in college, finished that, and we lost touch. And then when I was, moved back to New York, was living with my college roommate, and we kind of just had bumped into each other. My wife and I bumped into each other, and she came over one night and we had just to catch up. And we always say she came over and then she never left. And so that was the story for that. Do I have challenges in my marriage? Of course I have challenges in my marriage. Uh, Everybody has challenges in their marriage. I don't think there's a marriage out there that doesn't have challenges. So yeah, my marriage is not perfect. We have to work on it. Sometimes it ebbs and flows with how well we're communicating with each other and our level of well-being. But I'm committed, and she's a huge most important person in my life, other than my child. And so, but the marriage is something that takes some work, and we all grow at different rates. There's times when I've been in a big growth mode, and she hasn't, and times where she's been in a big growth mode, and I maybe haven't. And so you gotta be able to manage those situations. So, but that is my story. My wife is a psychiatric. She works in adult behavioral health as a medical professional, and that's that. Okay, let's see. Okay, I'll do one more question about me. Let me find one that. Let's see. Okay, I like this one. Here's a good question, Matt. Since we all have our own crazy, and you've mentioned that you have your own crazy, could you elaborate? Obviously, please don't incriminate yourself in any way. That's fine. I'm not going to incriminate myself. What is my what are my challenges where I have to really work at, and I've talked about it before. I don't like the words depression or anxiety or obsession or blah, blah, blah. I think the word activated is a much more universal term. And activation to me just means, when am I not feeling at my best? Like when I'm feeling like I'm getting a bit hooked, and and then I start to suffer. So I've said in the past that depression is kind of like it's like staring in the rearview mirror. It's this past tensing orientation where, most people with depression that I've worked with, the number one thing they say is, what's the point? It's just nothing ever really works. Why get out of bed? Why try? Because it always just kind of leads to bad things. That's kind of like the depressive, the layman sort of depressive orientation. And then there's the future focusing orientation, which is, what is the threat it's going to get me in the future, around the corner? What is going to come and grab me and suck me in the future? And that is kind of like the definition of anxiety. I am much more of an anxious. My states of activation are much more worry pervasive about future stuff than they are past reflection. We all go back and forth. We all oscillate, but I think most of us kind of have our own flavor. Are we more rearward facing, or are we more worried about what's in front? I'm definitely a worried about what's in front kind of person. And when I look back, when I was a kid, I was a pretty anxious kid. That I think it was triggered when my parents split up. I was about 7, and it was, my memories of that time are pretty foggy. I think just because, I don't know, maybe I just sort of dissociated out of it, or just didn't, but it was sort of this weird, confusing time of like coming and going and not really understanding what was happening. And, my parents didn't, I don't think they knew. They were quite young and didn't really know how to like communicate that stuff. They did the best that they could, but it sort of left some big holes of communication. And then what happened was, I don't think I was perseverating on that, but it started to manifest itself in other things. And, I was like not a great student in school. I was like the daydreamer. I did not learn the same way. I didn't learn the same way that, the standard way of learning. I was just like, I just had a weird way of integrating material. And back then there was no like, individual education plans or anything like that. They didn't have they were really stupid back then about how to educate people. It was just like, here's the way we educate people, and if you don't fit into that, you get put in the dummy group. And so I kind of ended up in like the group with the screw ups, all of us screw up kids, the ones that just didn't do well on our tests, and just kind of got labeled as the clowns or the rebellious kids, or I got put in with the bad group. And part of what was going on was I had so much stuff happening at home that was like not really being attended to. And it manifested itself in my behavior. And my behavior was I just tended to kind of check out. I wasn't interested. I didn't want to deal with it. I remember like I would manifest with physical symptoms. So like I remember starting to get like headaches all the time. I get headaches every day, or stomach aches before I had to go to school every single day. And my parents were just like, get up, you got to go, you got to go to school. There was like, this, what wasn't a lot of coochie coo around that, which is fine. I don't feel bad about that. I mean, it's just, they were trying to figure their lives out. They had a lot going on, and it was not easy with me and my, my siblings. And it was, and so, but I tended to become very somatic. And I think that is, as I've lived throughout my life, some of my tells are interesting. Is I'm a pretty cerebral person, but emotionally I'm very somatic. Like, so where oftentimes before my brain is aware of even what's going on, it's my body is starting to react. And so I tend to get, in the past, I've gotten pretty wrapped around the axle about physical symptoms. It used to really scare me when I was younger. I would have these sort of physical sensations, and oh my God, what is going on? What is going on? And I've had to really work at that over my life. A lot of the work I've done, just in my own personal development, was being able to figure out how to navigate those experiences and not get wrapped around the axle. And I think when I tend to get really wrapped around the axle, is it will be some kind of a physical, physical manifestation. So I harbor a lot of that in the body. Some people don't at all. They're just, it's all in their head. It's all sort of in their thinking. And they just don't have the physical stuff. So that's my crazy. So okay, here's the answer. What is Matt's crazy? My crazy, or where I get wrapped around the axle, in the past, it has been the physical manifestations of stress, whether it's, back aches or stomach aches or heart palpitations or uncomfortable feeling, buzzing sensations and these kinds of things where, you're like, oh my God, I'm dying. And I've had to work through that. And I think the difference is, so a lot of times my clients will say, well, do you still have these things? Well, of course I still have these things happen. That the objective is not to say don't have these things happen. That's just how I'm wired up. The difference is that in the past, before I really did a lot of work on myself, I would have these things and then it just gets stuck in it for weeks to months. It would just go on and on and on. And now I think when they come up, I figure out how to unhook and just move through that in a much more expedient way than I did in the past. So that's my crazy, if you want to call it crazy. It's not crazy. It's just, this is my patterns. This is the way things manifest. Just like we all have these things. I have them. We all do. And it's just a question of working on them and dealing with them, I think, is the objective. Not, I want to, completely eliminate this from my life. That's like saying don't ever have bad thoughts or, have uncomfortable feelings. Well, good luck. That's not going to really happen. So, all right. So there's a few questions about me. Maybe you're totally bored at this point. I don't know. Okay. Let's talk about breathing. Breathing is, now look, I could give you my own opinions and my own anecdotal evidence about breathing, but And anecdotal stuff is okay. There's nothing wrong with anecdotal things. And, I like to use the research. I like to use the science. Anecdotes is still part of science. Somebody said the other day, well, if it's anecdotal, it's not scientific. That's not true, actually. Anecdotes is a great place to start, especially when you're looking at experimental design. It starts with anecdotes, right? That's how you can create a hypothesis that is, somewhat relatable and makes sense. It starts with anecdotes. So anecdotal evidence is a powerful thing. You need to be able to support it. Eventually, you got to be able to test it to see if you can get closer and closer to the truth. But anecdotes is okay. So here's my anecdotal thing about breathing. Breathing is transformative that I've observed in myself and with my clients in terms of regulating how you feel, especially when you become really ginned up and really activated. The breathing follows that, and we'll get into this and we'll then look at the evidence in a second here. But the breathing is a key factor in being able to regulate the level of activation of your nervous system. And the level of activation of your nervous system changes how you cognate, how you think, how you reason, how you focus. And so breathing is a really important factor. Second, I remember attending this meditation retreat one time, and somebody said, "What's with all the breathing shit? Why always focus on the breath?" And the teacher, who was a very famous meditation teacher, he goes, "Well, tell you what, just hold your breath for a minute." And he had everybody hold their breath, and he never said, "Okay, breathe again." So people start gasping and like, oh, okay, they can't hold it forever. And he goes, "Yeah, that's why your breath is important." So I thought that was pretty funny. Breathing is something we're always doing. And as long as you're breathing, there's a lot more that is right with you than wrong with you. And so if you aren't breathing, you're not going to be around for very long. So that's why breathing is important. Second is it is a constant companion. The reason that when we learn mindfulness strategies and we use the breath, it's because it's this constant thing that's always there. Whether you want it to be or not, it's there. And it's real-time data. It's a real sensation. There's a lot of sensations that come with it. Where you experience it in your nose or in your throat or in your chest or in your abdomen. There's a lot of different ways you can work with that to give yourself an attitude indicator, if you will. And so that's why the breath is important. But let's look at some other implications. Now, there's a lot of really good studies. There's a lot of some very good books about breathing. And one book that I read that I thought was just so good, and it kind of changed my perspective on breathing, is a book called The Oxygen Advantage by a guy named Patrick McEwen. He's from Ireland, and he wrote this book. And when I read this book, I was like, oh my gosh, it's all based on data and science. And so what I thought is maybe I could just use that as a reference for our discussion today. And so let me just read a couple things for you from the Oxygen Advantage. So I'll start with a quote, as you know I like to do. I think quotes from books are really powerful. Don't take my words for it, take the author's. So here's a quote. It says, "We can live without food for weeks and water for days, but air for just a few brief minutes. While we spend a great deal of time and attention on what we eat and drink, we pay practically no attention to the air we breathe. It is common knowledge that our daily consumption of food and water must be of a certain quality and quantity. Too much or too little spells trouble. We also recognize the importance of breathing good quality air, but what about the quantity? How much air should we breathe for optimum health? Wouldn't it be fair to surmise that air, even more important than food or water for human survival, must also meet basic requirements?" The point of this book is to elevate, this is his quote, the point of this book is to elevate your awareness of how you can harness your breath to reclaim your body's natural ability to breathe in a way that will help you achieve lifelong health and fitness whether you are running to catch up with your kids or running to win a gold medal. My promise is that by applying the concepts and simple exercises in this book, each and every person, whether they consider themselves an athlete or not, will be able to attain tangible and profound improvements to their health, fitness, and performance within just a few weeks. Isn't it time you did more conditioning, winning, and living with less effort? So that's kind of a little synthesis of this book. And Patrick is really one of the world's leading teachers in the it's called Buteyko, 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 Buteyko method, breathing method, which was created in the 50s by a Russian physician. And so his story, Patrick's story, is he suffered from asthma for decades until he found this method, and which he applied it, and he completely reversed his asthmatic symptoms. And then it was such a life-changing experience for him that he dedicated his life to helping other people optimize their breathing. And so what he does in this book is he takes this method and he extends it into an approach he calls the oxygen advantage. And it's really fascinating. So this book is really helpful for optimizing. If you have something like asthma, or you're just interested in better performance, especially in sports, but I would just even say in life, this is a really good book to read. And it's got tons and tons of ideas. And so I want to just share a few ideas from this book, and then you can decide if it's something that you want to read or not. So let's see. Here's another quote. Scientific research, as well as the experience of thousands of people I've worked with, has shown me the vital importance of learning how to breathe correctly. The problem is that correct breathing, which should be everyone's birthright, has become extremely challenging in our modern society. We assume that the body reflexively knows how much air it needs at all times, but unfortunately, this is not the case. Over the centuries, we have altered our environment so dramatically that many of us have forgotten our innate way of breathing. The process of breathing has been warped by chronic stress, sedentary lifestyle, unhealthy habits, overheated homes, and lack of fitness. All of these contribute to poor breathing habits. These in turn contribute to lethargy, weight gain, sleep problems, respiratory conditions, and heart disease. Modern living gradually increases the amount of air we breathe, and while getting more oxygen into our lungs might seem like a good idea, here's where it gets really interesting, guys, is in fact light breathing that is a testament to good health and fitness. It's not deep breathing, it's lighter breathing. Think of an overweight tourist and an Olympian both arriving for the Summer Games. As they pick up their luggage and carried it up a flight of stairs, whom would you expect to be huffing and puffing? Certainly not the Olympian. The biggest obstacle to your health and fitness is a rarely identified problem: chronic overbreathing. We can breathe 2 or 3 times more air than required without knowing it. So here's the first thing that you should try to think about this. We breathe way too much. And so what are a few signs that you could be overbreathing? Well, can you visibly notice or hear yourself breathing when you're at rest? You ever just sat next to somebody that's just, you can hear them breathing? Do you breathe more from your chest than from your abdomen? More thoracic breathing than diaphragmatic breathing? Do you snore? It's a big one. How about at night? Do you breathe through your mouth when you sleep? Do you breathe through your mouth during the day? Mouth breathing, that's a big one. So some of this, if you answer to this, and this isn't to diagnose you with a breathing disorder, that's not what we're trying to do here, but this is, you may have a tendency to overbreathe. And so so then the question is, why is this an issue? So here's a quote. The crucial point to remember is that hemoglobin releases oxygen when in the presence of carbon dioxide. When we overbreathe, too much carbon dioxide is washed from the lungs, blood, tissue, and cells. This condition is called hypocampnia, causing the hemoglobin to hold on to oxygen, resulting in reduced oxygen release and therefore reduced oxygen delivery to tissues and organs. With less oxygen delivered to the muscles, They cannot work as effectively as we might like them to. As counterintuitive as it may seem, the urge to take bigger, deeper breaths when you hit the wall during exercise does not provide the muscles with more oxygen, but effectively reduces oxygenation even further. In contrast, when breathing volume remains nearer to correct levels, the pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood is higher, loosening the bond between hemoglobin and oxygen and facilitating the delivery of oxygen to the muscles and organs. John West, author of Respiratory Physiology, tells us that an exercising muscle is hot and generates carbon dioxide, and it benefits from increased unloading of O2, which is oxygen, from its capillaries. The better we can fuel our muscles with oxygen during activity, the longer and harder they can work. In light of the Bohr effect, overbreathing limits the release of oxygen from the blood and in turn affects how well our muscles are able to work. End quote. So what's this Bohr effect? Well, in 1904, this guy, Christian Bohr, he won a Nobel Prize. He's a physicist. And he discovered what is known as the Bohr effect, which is a central component of the oxygen advantage. So how Bohr put it is he said, the carbon dioxide pressure of the blood is to be regarded as an important factor in the inner respiratory metabolism. If one uses carbon dioxide in appropriate amounts, the oxygen that was taken up can be used more effectively throughout the body. So, okay, what's the punchline on what you need to know? Hemoglobin is the part of our blood that is responsible for carrying oxygen from the lungs and into the tissue and cells of our body. So to optimize our energy, we want to get really, really good at helping hemoglobin release the oxygen, and that requires proper levels of carbon dioxide. When we overbreathe, this disrupts that level and it leads to less oxygen release. So the primary goal of McEwen's oxygen advantage method is to help us recalibrate our carbon dioxide levels, essentially getting us comfortable having more of it in our bodies. Okay, so we could go on and on and on, and there's so much in here. I could do a long, extended review. I have so many pull quotes from this book that I had made notes on. But let's keep this short and keep it sweet. Let's figure out, okay, so what do we do? Well, what's the breathing we can do? So basic, right? Number one thing is breathe through your nose. McEwen says, in order to address breathing volume and increase Bolt score, Bolt is a type of score for your breathing. The first step is to go back to basics and learn to breathe through the nose, both day and night. As any child is aware, our nose is made for breathing. The mouth is made for eating. You were born breathing through your nose, and it has been our primary conduit for breathing for hundreds of thousands of years. It was only when our ancient ancestors were in dangerous situations that they reverted to mouth breathing to take in greater volume of air in preparation for intense physical activity. It is for this reason that mouth breathing is synonymous with emergency, freeze, fight, or run, activating the same fight or flight response that our ancestors experienced, but these days usually without the accompanying physical exercise to allow our operating system to revert back to normal. So you should be breathing through your nose essentially all of the time. And even, yes, during intense exercise, with rare moments for a little bit of mouth breathing. And there's a bunch of zone training exercises they do. But if you look at professional level athletes that are really they are not breathing through in their mouths, especially anything lower than zone 4. They are breathing through their nose exclusively. So the only time we used to breathe through our mouths was when we were trying to be chased by a tiger. Now, if you think about it, this is where the role of chronic stress is. We're always like engaged in mouth breathing, essentially living in this constant state of fight or flight stress, which we know physiologically, psychologically is a very, very bad idea. That leads to really, really bad things. So breathe through your nose all the time. So, okay, what if you can't breathe through your nose? What if you have some sort of obstruction? You need to get that addressed. So you need to go to your doctor or go to they'll probably send you to an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and you can get that fixed. If you have obstruction in your nose, like I have from deviated septums and all this stuff, you need to get that, you can get that fixed. Because if you're not able to breathe through your nose, you are going to be, ginning up your nervous system to think that there's a threat. And again, long-term effects of that. So, okay, we want to be breathing. And so let's talk about this now. When we're breathing through our nose, we want to be breathing from our abdomen, not from our chest. Your chest is your thoracic breathing. Abdominal breathing is your belly. That's your belly. So the question is, why do we want to do this? Well, here's what McEwen writes about. He says, abdominal breathing is more efficient simply because of the shape of the lungs. Since they are narrow at the top and wider at the bottom, the amount of blood flow in the lower lobes of the lungs is greater than in the upper lobes. The fast upper chest breathing of people who chronically hyperventilate does not take advantage of the lower parts of the lungs, limiting the amount of oxygen that can be transferred to the blood and resulting in a greater loss of CO2. Not only this, but upper chest breathing activates the fight or flight response, which raises stress levels and produces even heavier breathing. Observe your own breathing when you are stressed, or watch the breathing of anxious relatives, friends, or colleagues. You will see that this type of breathing is generally located in the upper chest and goes at a rate faster than normal. When we are stressed, we tend to overbreathe and resort to breathing through the mouth. Stress breathing is faster than normal, audible, produces visible movements, and often involves sighs. Yes, a lot of sighing. Many people habitually breathe in this manner every minute of every hour of every day, holding them in a perpetual state of fight or flight with adrenaline levels high. The work of even the best stress counselors, psychologists, or psychotherapists will be limited unless they first help their patients address their dysfunctional breathing. This is why I'm always harping on breathing. When oxygen delivery to the brain is reduced, no amount of talking and reasoning is going to correct this deficiency. Stressed and anxious patients can only make the progress they really need when their bad breathing habits are addressed. So this is some pretty amazing things. Have you noticed how you breathe when you're stressed? Just check it out next time. Notice what's going on, where you're breathing. Stress is rapid chest breathing, fight or flight, and it's not where you want to be. You want to get out of there because it's not good for you unless you really have a threat that you have to neutralize. Like, you got to get the tiger off of you. So slow down, breathe through your nose, and breathe into your abdomen. That's the tip number one. All right, and so let's get just to the goal is, there's more tips for breathing, but the ultimate goal, to keep this short, is to be effortless when you breathe. You want effortless breathing. So here's what McEwen says about that. This philosophy of effortless breathing is echoed by authentic teachers of Indian yoga and traditional Chinese medicine. I use the word authentic in order to differentiate practitioners who have a deep knowledge of breathing and how it affects physiology from those who don't. Unlike many modern Western teachers of yoga, who instruct students to breathe hard in order to remove toxins from the body, authentic teachers know that when it comes to breathing, less is more. The traditional Chinese philosophy of Taoism succinctly describes ideal breathing as so smooth that the fine hairs within the nostrils remain motionless. True health and inner peace occurs when breathing is quiet, effortless, soft, through the nose, abdominal, rhythmic, and gently paused on the exhale. This is how human beings naturally breathed until modern life changed everything. So we want our breathing to be quiet. We want it to be rhythmic. We want it to be controlled. And that's what I think he's getting at by meaning effortless. So that's just a little hint. One of the things in the book, he's got tons of practical exercises to help us optimize. So you can check out the book. One of these ideas is designed to stimulate the positive effects of training at altitude. Now, I live in Colorado. There's a lot of athletes that come to Colorado to train, especially like cyclists. And they'll even wear obstructive devices that obstructs their breathing just so they can train. And because there's a lot of positive effects of training at altitude, in which you go for a walk and just practice breath holding. So breath holding is one thing. So here's one little thing that you can try. You don't need medical supervision for this, but is go for a walk, breathe normally through your nose, and then take a small silent breath in, and then take a small silent breath out, then holding your nose closed with your fingers until you feel a strong need to breathe. And then quickly recover your normal breathing through your nose. You don't want to hold this for so long that you can't recover your breath within 2 or 3 breaths, and then repeat. So how many paces can you take? Believe it or not, McEwen has helped asthmatic kids get to 60 paces. 60. I don't think I can do that. I mean, I'm practicing some of this. I'm working on it. And especially even in doing some higher intensity training. And it's kind of quickly how fast you will adapt and how much harder you can go while properly oxygenating your muscles while breathing with less. It's kind of crazy. So start with that. Just play around with that a little bit and check out the book if you want to know more about breathing. Now, one of the things I know I'm going to get some emails about is, well, what about the Wim Hof method? Which is very centric in breathing. That arouses the autonomic nervous system to do some pretty amazing things. And so we can even review that if you want. We can do maybe another deep dive into what that is. But the point is we don't breathe correctly. We are not, if you just think very basically, if you're running around being chased by a tiger, how are you going to breathe? Well, you're going to be breathing through your mouth and all the way up in your lungs because you're trying to get the hell out of there. And that is a very, very stressful event. But if you're not in a stressful event and you're still breathing that way, think about the ramifications of what that's going to do long-term to your body. We're not designed to be in a constant state of hypervigilance or threat. That leads to chronic disease. And one last thing I'll mention about this, because a lot of issues that I see, a lot of issues that pilots have that we have is sleep issues. And so here's one last quote. I keep finding more quotes, you guys, because I just love this book. But he writes, "For many years, I too woke up tired and lethargic, suffering from poor concentration throughout the day. The key to improving the quality of my sleep was incredibly simple. All I had to do was to learn to keep my mouth closed during sleep. Because we are unaware of how we breathe at night, the only sure way to ensure nasal breathing is to wear light paper tape across the lips to prevent the mouth from falling open. Over the years, I've introduced this taping method to thousands of people with incredible results. Unless you breathe calmly through your nose at night, you have no idea what it feels like to have a great night's sleep. Taping the mouth at night is a simple but very effective technique, and while it may sound a little strange, it is well worth getting used to." So if you breathe through your mouth at night, and signs might be waking up with a dry mouth or just waking up and feeling really tired, there's some good solutions out there. You can go on Amazon. You can get 3M micropore tape. Put it on your lips before you go to bed and try it out. And yet you're going to, you might feel kind of funny and look a little strange, but I've done this with clients and it has been life-changing to them. Just making that one subtle shift to getting them to breathe through your nose. If you can't breathe through your nose, you need to go and get that looked at by an ENT so that you can address that. Because if you're not breathing through your nose, you're breathing through your mouth. You're breathing through your mouth all the time. You are in a constant state of hypervigilance, of hyperstress, and that's not going to help you. So, anyways, okay, that's it. I think hopefully that was useful. Oxygen Advantage. If you guys have any questions about that, I want you to send me some emails. podcast@liftaffect.com. And I think that is about it. Anybody interested in the V1 project? We just started a new cohort. Send us an email. Info. You can send emails to, actually, you can go to the v1project.com and you can fill in your information and we can get you signed up for the next cohort, which I think will be starting mid to late summer. So that's off and running. The results have been pretty good. They've been actually pretty awesome. The community is building itself and it's really exciting to watch. So I think that's the latest and greatest from here, and I hope everybody has a good, safe week, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Okay, take care. Bye. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the LiftAffect podcast. If you want to dive deeper into this episode and every episode, go to our website, LiftAffect.com/podcast. If you're enjoying the show, we would love it if you'd follow us on Spotify and rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate your support. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all with the ID Matthew McNeil. This show is brought to you by LiftAffect, a clinical mental health and consulting company that assists air carriers, corporate flight departments, pilot unions, and commercial pilots by providing comprehensive psychotherapy and mental skills coaching services to pilots with mental health and mental performance-related issues. Visit liftaffect.com, that's LiftAffect.com, to book your free consultation. And finally, this podcast is for general informational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of counseling, psychotherapy, medicine, or any other healthcare service, including the giving of medical advice. No therapeutic or provider-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and any materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional psychological advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining advice for any psychological or medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the LiftAffect podcast.